I saw a familiar face walking on the avenue, both surprised by the way we looked. The years had changed us too. We smiled and both embraced like old friends often do.
Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Gung Ho. It's July 13, 2021, and today I have a very special guest. I think he's the best trial lawyer in America right now. That means probably the world. And I found him through a friend of mine, Jeff Sussman, your publicist. And Jeff said he was going to send me your book. Mm-hmm. You were going to send it to me, but you didn't, but I bought it. And the name of the book is The Courtroom is My Theater. It's incredible. It's short stories. It recounts his life in and out of the court. And I was so impressed that I had to reach out to him. I did, and he's here. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him. He graduated Harvard Law School, went to Brooklyn College, got a scholarship at Harvard Law School. His first job was with ADA Hogan in Manhattan, right?
Yeah.
And also you joined ROTC, so you did some work in the Judge Advocate General's office, both prosecution and defense. And then you also worked as, I guess, the Assistant United States Attorney, or the Acting United States Attorney out in Indiana, and it was Robert Kennedy that actually came to you and asked you to do it. And that was an incredible, so you did that, and then finally, after doing all, you also went after corrupt cops and detectives on your own. I mean, your life has been, and then you went out and defended people. And some people say to you, how could you do that? I want you to start out by explaining, the difference between innocent and not guilty and what lawyers really do.
Well, thank you for having me, Joe.
You're welcome.
I met you when you were an assistant and when you were a prosecutor in the Eastern District of New York.
No, I was always a defense lawyer.
No, I know when you defended people accused of criminal conduct in the Eastern District of New York, in Manhattan. You had a very fine reputation that drew me to you as an admirer. The reason for going to Indiana was Kennedy's view, as expressed in his book, The Enemy Within, subscribed to by John Kennedy, who was then counsel to the, and a member, being a senator of the McClellan Crime Commission. They said that Indiana was the most corrupt area in the country, and that somebody had to go out there and clean it up of crime and corruption. And it was Indiana. And I said, well, the farthest west I've been is Lakewood, New Jersey, where Jewish people go to get a sunburn, and in the wintertime, and by the use of what was called a sun reflector. But I packed the car and went with my wife to root out crime and corruption in the Midwest. And seemingly my task was very simple. I was to find the malefactors in the Midwest who were preying upon the citizens of Lake County, Indiana, and bring them to justice. But when I went out, I found that I was subject to a number of pressures that worked against my quest to prosecute the guilty and let the innocent go free. Hoover wanted Kennedy to fail. And since I was Kennedy's man in the West, he would not provide any protection for the crimes and threats made against myself and my wife, jeopardizing our lives. And when I went out, I found that the chief malefactor was a friend of the Kennedys, someone who played football at the Hyannisport football games, and he was an untouchable as far as the Kennedys were concerned. And Kennedy had instructed me not to prosecute them or prosecute him, George Chacharis, as a leader of organized crime in the Midwest. And when I refused to listen to his direction, the Department of Justice would not protect me. So my wife and I were left alone with no FBI protection because we were seeking to prosecute the mayor of Gary, Indiana, his favorite person in the Midwest, and I was not protected by the FBI. So I remember standing in an airport at midnight when I was notified that the FBI would not protect me because a man who was the special agent in charge of the FBI had flown up from Indianapolis to tell me of the fact that the FBI would not protect me. I was left alone with my wife to fend for ourselves against the threats and the violence that was perpetrated against us. And it was a very heady experience, but a very dangerous one. And that was, I guess, the high point of my career, because I did not listen to Kennedy's direction, Robert's direction, to let off the man who headed the corrupt scheme out in the Midwest.
You went ahead and you prosecuted.
I prosecuted them.
And it was the community got behind you.
Well, the community got behind me, Joe, to this extent. When I was recalled from Indiana, and I was in Gary, in Washington, the citizens of Gary contracted with a company in Chicago to send 50 coconuts to the White House, along with the message to send me back. It was a takeoff on John Kennedy's rescue in PT 109 when he sent a coconut through the water to an adjoining vessel. So the community rallied with 50 coconuts. The president called and said that he had never seen such an outpouring of community support, and he was forced to send me back. As a kid, I was 29, I got off the plane, and the Chicago Tribune said that, like MacArthur, he had returned. And of course, I played it to the hilt, and I raised my hand in the private plane that took me back from my home base, from Washington to Gary, Indiana. And that enabled me to go forward with the prosecution and clean up the community. And I just want to tell you this. When Robert Kennedy was running for president, the nomination, he was a guest at a large affair to raise money for his campaign. And he was congratulated for all that he had done in Gary, Indiana, in cleaning the community up of crime and corruption. And when an accolade was made for his work, he turned to the left, and I was there with a martini glass in my hand, and we hadn't spoken in a number of years. And he said the credit goes not to him, but to Jay Goldberg. And I tipped my glass to him, and a month later, he was assassinated. And that was a very heady experience.
That, you could hold up, let me just hold this book up for a second. Politics over honor. I guess that was maybe your first experience where politics interfered with what had to be done, justice.
Well, it was the first time as a kid thinking that the guilty get punished and the innocent go free, that I realized that it wasn't that way, that politics can override a quest to do good. And we went out there, my wife and myself, to do good and do good for the community, but politics had intervened. And that was a very disturbing experience.
Well, you know something? It could have been the end of your career, and you just did the right thing, and it worked out for you. That's really important.
Well, I talk about a profile in courage, and this is the last that I'll talk about myself. When I told Kennedy that I intended to go into the grand jury and indict, or ask the jury to indict Mayor Chicheras, who headed the ring of malefactors, and he told me not to do it, I said, I'm going to do it. He says, I don't think I understand. He's not giving a request. He's giving a direct order not to indict the mayor. But I went ahead and I indicted the mayor. And that was a profile in courage at the age of 29. And you're right. Kennedy could have called me back, and that would have been the end of it.
He could have fired you.
He could have fired me.
And when Robert Kennedy told you to do that, he was committing the crime of obstruction of justice.
Well, in many ways he was. But for the community's support, I wouldn't have been able to go forward. It's very rare that a community responds as affirmatively as this community did with the coconuts to the White House. And that was a high watermark in the campaign to prosecute the wrongdoer. Now, keep in mind that this area was thought to be controlled by Kennedy's number one at the time, Paramore. And he and Sam Giannini, who supposedly controlled Gary, Indiana, were shared a common woman.
Common mistress, or...
That's true. And it was a very dangerous area. And when we went out west, we thought we would have it easy, that we'd enjoy Chicago and the better parts of Chicago, which is a beautiful city with great architecture. But we found that we were not.
You know something, the more you talk about it, I keep thinking about J. Edgar Hoover in the background. Why did Kennedy send you out there? And it was because Hoover hated the Kennedys and he wanted them to fail.
Yeah, but he didn't control Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy was 35. Kennedy was then 30 years younger than Hoover. Hoover didn't like anything about the Kennedys or Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy had a dartboard, and I'll never forget, in his office. He never wore a tie. He had crayon pictures drawn by his 11 kids plastered up on the wall. Hoover, on the other hand, was never seen without a tie, ran a very strict operation, and he was offended by the way in which Robert Kennedy administered the office of Attorney General. So they didn't get along, and he was very happy to kibosh any plan to clean the area up. The sad fact is that Kennedy had his own agenda, and the two of them together resulted in a fearful experience for my wife and myself.
That was a very dangerous learning experience, but that's impressive. I mean, when I mustered out of the Marine Corps, I got out because I didn't want to go back to Vietnam, and my commanding officer called me into his office and he said to me, we need officers like you. And I said, I'm not going back to Vietnam. He says, I'm going to give you one bit of advice. Don't ever prostitute yourself for anyone or anything. That's what he told me. And that's how I've lived my life, like you have.
Well, the military experience is wanting in the presidential candidates and occupants. And I think that's a very bad lesson that we learn. They don't understand the danger of armed conflict. They administer the defense of this country protection-wise without any experience such as you had. They never lived through a tenure as an Army officer or as an enlisted man, and that's a danger to the American system, which seeks to protect our country.
You know, something I've thought about this so many times. I think that anybody that wants to run for a high federal office, I'm not talking about a congressman or a senator or the president or whatever, one of the requirements is that they serve active duty for 4 years.
I think that's true.
Because
I think
you're right. We have people that have, like even Joe Biden, never served.
no, nobody served.
So how
George Bush served in the New York, in the Texas Guard, which is a substitute for active duty. Clinton was a draft dodger. There's no question about that. He ran to...
He went to Europe.
No, he ran to Canada, and he avoided the draft. And the only one who served with distinction was George H.W. Bush, George Bush's father. He was an example that few people could match in terms of courage and quality of life. Remember, his plane was shot down. He parachuted. He was president of the baseball team. He was the head of the CIA. He did wonderful things, but his work is lost in history, and that's sad.
It is sad because when you think back, how did Clinton beat him? It's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, draft dodger beats this hero. Veterans really don't get, I mean, when they run for president, they don't get the respect that they really deserve. For some reason, the American people, like John Kane, John Kerry, Bush 41, I don't know what's wrong with the American people. You got people that, you know, they're coming forward, they're experienced, they're intelligent, they have wisdom, they have all the qualifications.
Well, it's living experience of the most dangerous quality to actually be in combat with an enemy, toughens up the participant so that he can handle. Look, one of our great presidents was Dwight Eisenhower.
Yes.
Few people give him the respect that he deserves. But with Eisenhower, we had no wars. He was against war. And the country profited from his behavior. He did so much for the country. And one of the most important was the road system that makes it easy for travel. And as I say, he made sure that there would be no war that we would be engaged in. And when you think of that, that's a plus that few people can match, and certainly no president can match.
Well, I keep thinking about presidents that have served, and the first one, George Washington, served, 2 terms. He was a warrior. I mean, he had been to wars.
Yes.
He was our first president.
Right. He was a heroic soldier of the highest type. But then you had wonderful presidents who didn't serve.
Yes.
And I guess it depends on the quality of the individual. You can be a soldier and a quality person, or a non-combatant and a quality person. But in the last few years, we've had people who've never experienced the danger of being a combat soldier. and they're ready to bring us to the edge of a combat situation.
Classic example. I was not a fan of Obama's, and I said on this show that, you know, he's not going to be the president you people out, some of you people out there think he's going to be. Because why? He's too young. He has no wisdom. He has no experience. And the military is going to chew him up and spit him out. And when he made a decision to send, what do they call it? He sent 70,000 additional troops to Afghanistan and called it a good war, and we have to win this war. He was an idiot thinking that, and he did it.
Well, no one has been successful in a combat situation with Afghanistan. Russia tried it. Russia committed countless soldiers to the war that Russia was waging against Afghanistan, and they failed after 10 years of combat. Why we should be there for 20-odd years surprises me.
Well, I think Bush 43 made a mistake. They should have concentrated on going after Al-Qaeda no matter where they were, but they took on the Taliban.
Yes.
Yeah, that's like coming here and you know, an army coming here and want to take over, and we start fighting against them. Mm-hmm. We're not going to go attack them where they came from, but we're certainly going to get them out of our country. Mm-hmm. That's the Taliban. So it was a really stupid thing to do.
But the Taliban is
they're not that good either. I mean, but they're indigenous. They're the people.
Well, we can't wage a battle all over the globe. The country would easily go bankrupt, and something has to be done. It's sad because yesterday 25 Afghan warriors surrendered, and you can actually see them on television with their hands raised. Yes. And that meant something in the war. And yet, with their hands raised, the Taliban shot every one of them dead. So the Taliban issued 2 orders: that a woman is not permitted to leave her home without a man, and they have to wear the burqa. So, but that's got to be not our business. They grew up warring, and they'll be warring for the next 20 years. And if the government of the United States wants to engage for 20 years in a battle, in another battle against the Taliban, it'll bankrupt the country.
So far, $1 trillion have been spent in Afghanistan, and probably $2 trillion in Iraq. And they say by the end, and you round up all the costs, and the veterans
Yes.
care and everything, it's going to cost $7 trillion, those 2 wars.
Well, I ask you, there's terrible suppression of liberty and destruction of the right to carry on normal activities as human beings want to do. What role, if any, does the United States have in bringing stability to that region?
The United States can't do it alone. It has to be, well, there were a lot of allies there, but it has to be an international force sponsored by the UN if they want to do anything. I don't think anything's going to work there. You know, whatever, you know, like the thing about the women, that's a cultural thing. They have to deal with that. How long did it take all women to get the right to vote?
Yeah, but they were never subject
No.
to the kind of atrocities that the Taliban heaps on women. You know, I worry that under American participation, women were able to be educated. Colleges were opened up. The women who have great intelligence, of course, that's a racist remark, a feminist, anti-feminist remark, but I mean it positively. They have wonderful things to offer as a, I mean, in my school, women were always first in the class, along with the Oriental people. And any country, any regime that comes in with a view to suppress them, to give them only the right to sit in the back of the bus.
We're about to end this show, but I want you to say a few words about Rima. You're talking about a woman.
Yes. We were publicized in the Daily News and the New York Post as a husband and wife team, because wherever I went, I had the counsel of a woman who was steeped in philosophy and psychology, and she provided a wonderful support for me with her skill. I used her in every, use her is a bad expression. I made use of her in selecting juries, and she would say she knew how to select appropriate people better than I did, and I made use of her abilities by bringing her into all of the cases, and she was a major participant, and her skill as a psychologist was recognized across the country because she was a person who was selected by lawyers in various parts of the United States to help select juries for the combating lawyers.
You know, having a woman like that is really a very special thing.
It was special.
And it still is special, I could tell.
And when, I must tell you this, when we were alone in Indiana, the threats to kill were leveled at the person who I admired the most, my wife. But I'll tell you this, one day I said, Rima, you go out and start the car, because they killed people in the Midwest by a bomb underneath the car, and the ignition started the bomb mechanism to go off. So kidding around, I said, Rima, you go out and start the car. I'm more important to the government than you are. So she gave me a look, Joe, that really ended it.
And we're done with the first show.
Okay.
Old time. Where have my old friends gone? Where are they now? Used to be a walk away in my hometown, but they're so far away, as far can be. But in my heart they're close to. Yes, in my heart they're close to. In my heart they're close to me.